You want to know why the rule existed? I'll tell you, but you should understand something first. I helped write it. My name is Tavik Realm. I was a sub-marshal of the Calorian Vanguard for 41 cycles. I have stood on 11 worlds while they burned. I have given orders that fed good soldiers into fire because the math said it had to be done. I am not a soft creature. My people are not a soft people. So when I tell you that the rule called Protocol 11 made sense to me once, you'll know it wasn't cowardice talking. It was fear, the smart kind. The rule was simple: no Terrans on the battlefield. Humans could fly our supply lanes. They could fix our reactors, set our bones, cook our food, count our shells. We let them do all of it. They were good at all of it. But the line itself, the place where bodies meet, was closed to them. Forbidden. Written into the Concord Accords in 3 languages and sealed with the marks of 9 species. We told them it was for their protection. We said their bodies were fragile. Soft skin, no plating, hearts that stop if you hit them wrong. We said the line was no place for a creature that breaks so easily. That was the lie we said out loud. The truth, the one we said quietly, in rooms with the doors shut, was the opposite. We didn't keep humans off the line because they broke too easily. We kept them off because of what happened the one time they didn't break at all. You weren't there for Tarn Hollow. Few living things were, that's the point. A human relief column got cut off from the main force, surrounded, no way out. Standard doctrine says when you're surrounded with no relief and no supply, you signal surrender, you preserve life, you wait for prisoner exchange. Every species in the Concord follows that. It is not shame, it is sense. The humans did not signal surrender. They fought for 19 days. When their ammunition ran low, they fought with tools. When the tools broke, they fought with their hands. The enemy commander, a Suthai field general with 1,000 cycles of experience, sent 3 demands for surrender, and each one came back unanswered because the humans on the other end had decided that the answer was no, and they had decided it together, and nothing in our long shared history of war had a word for what that was. When we finally broke through to relieve them, only 11 were still alive. They were standing. I want you to hear that. They were standing. And the Concord looked at those 11 standing humans, and instead of pinning honors on them, we got very quiet. Because every one of us did the same math at the same time. We imagined a galaxy of them. We imagined a war where the other side simply would not stop ever, for any reason, until the last one was cold. And it frightened us so deeply that within 2 cycles we had a new law on the books. No Terrans on the battlefield. For their protection. I signed it. My mark is on that page. I believed it was wisdom. I want you to know I believed it so that you understand what it cost me to be wrong. Now, the world where I learned how wrong I was. It was called Ofrest, a moon really big and gray, orbiting a dead gas giant out on the Vale frontier. Nothing lived there but us, our garrison, and the cold. There was a jump gate anchored at its pole, and that gate was the only fast road between the frontier and 9 core worlds full of people who had never heard a shot fired. Lose Ofrest, lose the gate. Lose the gate, and the road home stood open. So we held it. 3 conquered legions dug into the rock. Calorian heavy infantry, Imrith engineers, Suthai command, a scattering of smaller folk. Good soldiers, the best the Concord had. And tucked away behind all of them in the supply depots and the medical bays, the Terrans, counting shells, setting bones, off the line where the law said they belonged. The enemy was the Vor. I don't expect you to have fought them, I hope you never do. The Vor are not a people, not the way you and I are people. They are a swarm. Armored drones, each one barely smart, but linked all of them to nodes that think for the whole. They don't get tired. They don't get scared. And worst of all, they learn. You use a tactic once, it works. You use it twice, it works less. You use it a 3rd time and they have already grown the answer to it. Fight them long enough, and you are fighting a mirror of yourself that never sleeps. We had never lost to them. We had also never really beaten them. We had only ever held and bled and held again. On Ofrest we stopped holding. It started slow, the way the worst things do. A probing attack on the eastern ridge. We threw it back, lost 40 soldiers, called it a good day. Then another, harder. Then they hit the same ridge a third time with exactly the formation that beat our defense because they had watched our defense and grown the counter to it overnight. We lost the ridge. Then the second ridge. Then the whole eastern arc folded inward like wet cloth, and the cold gray rock filled up with them, more than we could count, more than we could kill. The Suthai strategists ran their models. I was in the command bunker when the numbers came up on the wall. I remember the silence. Suthai do not panic. They are the calmest minds in the conquered, all logic, no heat. And one of them, a field strategist named Asan, looked at the model for a long moment and then said, in a flat, quiet voice, that we had between 9 and 14 hours before the western breach opened, and that once it opened we would lose the gate. 9 to 14 hours, and every reserve we had was already in the line. I will tell you exactly what that meant, because the words "lose the gate" are too clean. It meant the war would pour through to 9 living worlds. It meant the war stopped being a war on a gray moon and became an extinction. It meant children I had never met on planets I had never seen were going to die in numbers I could not hold in my head, and there was nothing left in our order of battle to stop it. Nothing left. Except Asan was the one who said it. I'll always remember that it was a Suthai, a creature of pure cold reason, and not a warrior like me, who said the thing none of us could say. There is a Terran logistics company at Depot 7, Asan said. Roughly 200. They are nearest the western breach. They could hold the corridor for a time. The command bunker went very still. A Calorian colonel said what we were all thinking. He said it was against the Accords. He said it was illegal. He said the protocol was clear, no Terrans on the battlefield, and that he would not be the one to put soft-skinned auxiliaries into a slaughter and answer for it after. And Asan looked at him, this little gray logician, and said the truest thing I have ever heard a soldier say. After, Asan said, there will be no one left to answer to. Part 2. I went to Depot 7 myself. I don't know why. I could have sent the order down a calm line. But I think some part of me needed to look at the creatures I was about to spend, to see their faces, before the math erased them. The depot was a low bunker dug into the rock, lit yellow, smelling of machine oil and the strange warm bread smell humans carry. There were maybe 200 of them, like Asan said. They had pulled weapons from the stores, old pattern rifles mostly, the kind we issue to rear units and forget about. They were loading magazines and checking straps and not talking much. They already knew. Word travels in a garrison faster than any order. A human came to meet me. Older, I could tell, gray threaded through the dark hair, lines worn into the face. The stripes on the sleeves said sergeant. The name on the chest said Akafar. I had expected fear. I want to be honest about that. I had come down expecting to see 200 frightened creatures who knew they'd been handed a death they didn't choose, and I had braced myself to give the order anyway, because the math is the math. Sergeant Akafar looked up at me. I am twice her height. My people are built like the rock we fight on, and she did not look frightened. She looked tired, and under the tired she looked steady, like a thing that has already decided. Sub-Marshal, she said. We've heard the corridor by the western breach. You need it held. You understand, I said, that this is against the Accords. You are not required, the protocol. I know the protocol, sir, she said. We all know the protocol. And there was something in how she said it, not anger, older than anger. A thing my people had put on her people, written into law for cycles, and she had carried it without complaint, and now here I was at the worst hour of the worst day asking her to break it for us, to die for us, off the books, after we'd told the whole galaxy her kind wasn't fit for the line. She could have spat in my face. By any reckoning I deserved it. Instead she said, "What's behind the gate, Sub-Marshal, if it falls?" So I told her, 9 worlds, the numbers, the children. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned and looked back at her 200, loading their old rifles in the yellow light, and she said more to them than to me, "All right then." That was all right then, as if I had asked her to move a crate. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. I keep waiting in the memory for her to ask what they'd get for it. Medals, honors, their protocol struck down, a statue, anything. She never asked. None of them ever asked. They picked up their rifles and they went to hold the corridor because 9 worlds they would never see were on the other side of it, and that to them was enough. I did not understand it then. I am not sure I fully understand it now, but I have stopped needing to. Some things you don't have to understand to know they're true. The corridor was a cut in the rock, maybe 200 strides long, the only ground route from the western breach to the gate complex. Hold the corridor, you hold the gate. The Vor came up that cut like gray water up a drain. I stayed. I'll tell you that, though it shames me a little. I told myself I stayed to coordinate, to relay, to be useful. The truth is I stayed because I could not make myself leave 200 creatures I'd ordered to die without watching what my order did. So I took a position with a Calorian-heavy team on the high rock above the corridor, where we could lay fire down the cut, and I watched the humans go to work. They were not good soldiers, I'll say that plainly. They had no business in that fight by any measure we used. Their formations were loose. Their fire discipline would have failed a recruit inspection. They were logistics troops with rear-line rifles, not line infantry, and you could see it in everything they did. But they did not break. The Vor came in a wave that would have shaken a Calorian veteran company, and the humans did not break. They fell back, yes, but they fell back the way water falls back from a stone, giving ground and closing again behind it, never quite cracking. When one fell, 2 more closed the gap without an order like they'd practiced it, though I knew they hadn't. When the Vor learned to push and grew the counter, the humans simply did something stupid and unpredictable that no doctrine would sanction, and because it followed no doctrine, the Vor had nothing grown to answer it. They held that corridor not by being better than the swarm. They held it by being stranger than the swarm could learn. I watched a human medic, small, young, I learned later her name was Nair, run out into open fire to drag a wounded man back. That is against doctrine too, you understand. You do not trade a live soldier's exposure for a wounded one. The math is bad. Every species in the Conquered knows it. She ran out anyway, got him by the straps, hauled him back into cover, and went out again for the next one. 3 times. 4. Like the math simply did not apply to her. Like there was a different math, one I had never been taught, where a wounded soldier was not a number to be weighed but a person to be reached, and the only question was whether you could reach them, not whether you should. Hours passed, the corridor held, and I began to feel something move in my chest that I had not felt in 41 cycles of war. Hope, the dangerous kind. That was when the eastern wall of the cut collapsed. I don't know if it was a Vor charge or just the moon shrugging under all that fire, but a whole face of rock came down, and it buried the forward Calorian position, my people, a dozen of them, and it opened a hole in the corridor wall the size of a dropship. The Vor saw it the way water sees a crack. They surged for it, and on the wrong side of that surge, cut off, half buried under broken rock, were a dozen Calorian heavy infantry, and by the worst luck of my long life, me. I had moved down to the forward rock to see better. I will not pretend it was brave. It was a sightseer's death, and I had walked into it. I was pinned, a slab across my legs, my comm dead, the Vor maybe 40 strides off and closing, and a dozen of my soldiers around me in the same state or worse. Doctrine in that moment was very clear. You do not counterattack into a closing breach to recover the wounded and trapped. The math is bad. You hold the line you can hold and you write the rest off. Every species in the Conquered knows it. I knew it. I had given that exact order on other worlds. I lay there under the rock and I did the math myself out of habit, and the math said the humans should fall back to the gate, seal it, and write off the forward position. Write off the trapped Calorians. Write off me. I waited to be written off. That is what should have happened. By every rule we had ever made, by every law I had ever signed, that is what should have happened. It is not what happened. Part 3. I heard them coming before I saw them. Human voices shouting, not in panic, in command, calling to each other, a rough rhythm of names and directions. And then a shape came over the broken rock, and it was Sergeant Akafer with maybe 30 of her people behind her, coming the wrong way, coming into the breach, toward us, toward the swarm. I shouted at her. I did. With what air I had under that slab, I shouted for her to fall back, to seal the gate, that the math was bad, that we were lost, that she would only feed her people into the same fire. I was a sub-marshal of the Calorian vanguard, and I was begging a human logistics sergeant to leave me to die because the numbers said she should. She heard me. She looked right at me, pinned there, and she heard every word. And then she said, "I will carry this to the grave," she said. "Yeah, we don't really do that, sir. We don't really do that." They came in shooting. 30 soft-skinned auxiliaries with rear-line rifles, into a breach the Vor were pouring through, against every law of war the conquered had ever written, to pull out a dozen trapped Calorians and one foolish sub-marshal who had helped keep their whole species off the battlefield. They formed a rough arc around the buried position. They put their bodies between us and the swarm. The medic, Nair, she was there too, already at the nearest wounded Calorian, hands moving. 2 of Akafer's people got the slab off my legs. I could not stand. They carried me, 3 of them, struggling under my weight, because Calorians are not made to be carried by humans, and they did it anyway, dragging me back over the broken rock while the others held the arc. I watched it from the ground as they pulled me. I watched 200, now fewer, far fewer, strange, fragile, impossible creatures hold a collapsing breach with their own bodies, so that a dozen of mine could live. I watched Nair drag a Calorian twice her size across open rock and take a hit doing it and keep dragging. I watched human after human go down in that yellow-gray light and the line not break, never break, because every time it should have broken someone simply refused, and the refusal held it up like a beam. And I watched Sergeant Akafer. She was the last one out. She stood in the gap of that breach when everyone else had pulled back, when the wounded were clear and the trapped were free, and she held the gap alone with a rifle she had to keep clearing because it was old and it jammed. She held it long enough for us to reach the rear of the corridor, long enough for the engineers to bring the gate seal charges live, long enough for the math to finally turn in our favor. She did not come back from the gap. I want to tell you she did. In the version of this story I tell myself on the bad nights she does. But you asked for the truth, and the truth is that Sergeant Akafer held the breach in the western corridor of Offrest until the seal came down, and the seal came down between her and us, and she was on the wrong side of it, and she knew she would be, and she held it anyway. The corridor held, the gate held, the 9 worlds behind it never knew how close the dark came. We took back Offrest in the cycles that followed. The Vor advance broke on that gray moon and never recovered its weight on the frontier. The historians will tell you it was the gate, the strategy, the reserves we bought time to bring up. The historians are wrong, or they are only partly right. We won because 200 creatures we had forbidden from the battlefield went onto it anyway, and did the one thing the swarm could never learn to do. They came back for us. I am an old soldier now, older than I have any right to be, given that I should have died under a slab of rock on a moon called Offrest with the math against me. I live because a human decided the math was wrong. I have spent the cycles since trying to learn the different math she used. I am not sure I have it even now, but I have come closer than I would have believed. The protocol is gone. You know that already. They struck it down within a cycle of Offrest, and they did not strike it down quietly. They struck it down loud in 3 languages before all 9 species, and they put new words in its place. Terrans on the battlefield by right, by honor beside us. My mark is on that page too. Right under the old one I crossed out myself. There is a thing they say now on the frontier. The enemies of the conquered say it most of all. When the old species fought without humans, the saying went one way: no Terrans on the battlefield, a rule, a comfort, a fence we built around our own fear. The Vor would have welcomed that fence. They would have learned everything else we had. But you cannot learn a thing that refuses to make sense. You cannot grow the counter to a creature who runs the wrong way into a breach to carry out a soldier. It has every reason to leave. You cannot mirror a people whose math says go back for them always, even when the numbers scream no. So the saying changed. It means the opposite thing now. When our enemies see Terrans on the line, the old words come back to them, and they are no longer a rule we made for our comfort. They are a warning we send to theirs. No Terrans on the battlefield. You had better hope so. Sergeant Adiz Akafer, Depot 7, off rest. She would not want a statue, so we did not build one. We did the other thing instead. We learned her math, and we will be teaching it to our enemies for a very long time.